Sightseers is a very dark comedy, with two protagonists who turn a caravan holiday into a murder spree. The depiction of each murder is gleefully nasty. The sex life of the main characters is suitably grotesque, and the narrative concludes with the more unpredictable of the two seemingly free to carry on. The locations, character archetypes, dialogue, accents, and focus on minor points of class conflict all make the film distinctly British, as does the deadpan yet absurd style of humour. The film draws on a range of influences. Mike Leigh's Nuts in May is clearly a source text, with its class tensions and undercurrent of violence in a camping holiday. Ealing Studios films such as Kind Hearts and Coronets and The Lady Killers tap into a similar vein of murder comedy. Great British horrors such as The Wicker Man or Blood on Satan's Claw uncover the darkness and violence of old, weird Britain that seems to fascinate Sightseers director Ben Wheatley and influences his use of mise-en-scène. Producer Edgar Wright's own style of character comedy in apocalyptic situations is also there in the mix. The narrative belongs to Tina. It is she who finds a clear character arc, shifting from childlike, fearful, and at least symbolically virginal in the opening scene to assertive, aggressive, and free at the end. Structurally, Tina's narrative journey to independence can be charted through key moments roughly 10 to 15 minutes apart, each murder signifying a step on the way. Looking at two main examples and how the use of film form compares and contrasts reveals how the narrative is structured. The killing of Ian is the first unambiguous murder that we see on screen. The earlier death of the Cornetto man had been a shock. As the spectator is more aligned with Tina's perspective at this point, we hadn't seen it coming. This time, we have a greater sense of anticipation. Although Tina is not present for the killing, the shots of her disturbed sleep imply subconscious awareness. Tina dances with the shaman around the fire. Is this something she actually does, or is it a fantasy of abandon that she desires? Either way, she is inspired to try to sexually arouse Chris, who pretends to be asleep. Next, the shots of Chris in the misty woods foreshadow the dream he has later, where Tina has become a vampire. His red hood might also be a nod to another classic British horror, Nick Roeg's Don't Look Now. Chris begins and ends the sequence marching towards us in a backwards following shot. He is powerful and threatening, coming for us. The shots of the countryside at dawn are sublime. There's no hint of civilization, a binary opposite to the clutter of Tina's mother's house from the opening scenes. Moreover, we cut between the images of domesticity and innocence, Tina in bed, Janice preparing breakfast. The soundtrack plays Season of the Witch, the lyrics directly referencing fear of the terrifying female, sung with a male voice. This is significant as Chris will later call Tina a witch, and his later dream in medieval costume all add to this. At this point of the film, it is the man who is the danger, however, but that is going to change. Match cuts further emphasise the points of opposition. The rock that seems to have a trilobite fossil, and the saucepan, one to kill Ian, the other to nourish him. Another element is introduced to the montage, the shaman sacrificing a chicken while howling, intercut with the dog also howling. There is no diegetic sound for either. Then we see the rock smashing Ian's skull and the egg breaking. Banjo is a helpless witness, and the cut to the turning Tina links the two. The shot duration becomes much shorter at the same time as the murder becomes slow motion, initiating a pattern that will be repeated for the murders to come. Cutting away to Janice hurting her foot on the plate Chris broke earlier at the point when he kills her husband shows how destructive and powerful he has become. The casual encounter between the couples has had appalling consequences for their cosy middle-class life. Tina will even take their dog. The murder, the sacrifice, the howling animal, bloody wounds, casual disposal of the body are all intercut with Tina's disturbed sleep. Again, does this suggest a gradual metaphorical awakening on her part? Chris breaks the fourth wall, triumphant in a shot similar to the start of the sequence, and Tina wakes suddenly, implying a direct reaction. The later sequence is Tina's first murder, and the contrasts are clear, showing how far Tina's narrative arc has travelled. This time, it is Chris who sits passive and helpless. He is awake and fully aware of what Tina is going to do, signifying his diminishing authority. The shot reverse shot as the policeman enters the restaurant indicates a brief moment of fear on his part. The actor's expression and the tighter framing show this. In his later dream sequence, there is another brief shot of Tina being apprehended by the police. It seems to be an outtake from the final scene. The cross-cutting between the policeman's movements and Tina's now directly signals power and inevitability. Match cuts in movement and framing highlight the parallel. By now, the similarity in cross-cutting from the earlier murder is obvious. Season of the Witch plays again, this time with a female voice. The balance of power and violence is now shifting from male to female in the film. Note also the same device used in the two versions of Tainted Love from the end of the opening and closing sequences. I'm also not going to pass up the opportunity to mention the excellent use of krautrock throughout the soundtrack, with music by Popol Vuh, Harmonia and Neu making an appearance. The policeman turns out to be a stripper, a comic and grotesque juxtaposition between the hen party and the bloody murder of the bride outside. The killing once again shifts to slow motion and rapid jump cutting into 4 separate shots. There's a wry match on action as the stripper removes his trousers, just in case we hadn't had enough connections between sex and violence in the film so far. The bride's fall to her death is also carved into 5 shots, climaxing with her head being stoved in on a rock. No fossil this time, but the parallel with the earlier murder of Ian is clear. Now the close-up on Tina's face looking at us shows how she has taken the power away from Chris, who's left to furtively slip away from the restaurant. No more killing for him in the rest of the film. Tina will take over now. Is there a clear ideology in Sightseers? It is, after all, a comic story of violent death with a lot of jokes about excrement. A Marxist framework fits broadly if we consider the way that Tina gradually becomes conscious of how she is held back by capitalist authority. It is a stretch, though, and the two characters only half-heartedly attempt to justify their actions. Chris seeks control, while Tina embraces chaos. Chris's statements about class are inconsistent. Overall, perhaps the film is too carnivalesque to be truly Marxist. More useful is to take a feminist critical approach, if we consider that Tina takes on a journey to overthrow the patriarchal authority represented by Chris in order to discover herself as independent and free. In the opening sequence, she declares that she hates her home and wishes to destroy everything, narrative foreshadowing. By the end, this is exactly what she has done. To take a specific feminist critical framework, it is useful to look at Barbara Creed's work, The Monstrous Feminine. Here she outlines several elements that characterise the violent female in the horror genre. If Sightseers isn't exactly a horror film as such, Tina certainly fits Creed's archetype of the witch, named as such by Chris, who also dreams of her as the vampire. Tina's growing sexual assertiveness becomes both terrifying and attractive to Chris, casting her as what Creed calls the femme castratrice, the castrating female. The narrative shows Tina becoming increasingly fixated on the abject, the sense of self that is usually rejected as other or not me, elements of the self that we might consider dirty. Tina makes multiple references to corporophilia, bestiality, violence and dark emotions. Vampirism, blood, body fluids and viscera all add to the messy fun, and the fascination becomes more dominant as Tina fully accepts these elements of herself. From throwing pasta sauce at, not into a bin, to the sequence where she dominates, humiliates and then disposes of the hapless Martin, epitomise her journey to a fully realised self. Crucially, by the ending, the narrative with Tina free and ecstatic at Chris's death, the femme castratrice has triumphed in embracing her own abject nature. Tina is an unlikely siren, luring helpless men to their doom, but that is exactly what she has become. Overall, yes, Sightseers is a scatological, shocking, violent comedy. It is also a subtle and very clever film.